Okay, now we're going to talk about something called vertical angles. Now, what we learned before is that vertical angles are congruent, not supplementary. So they don't add up to 180. They are actually congruent. So let's draw two lines that intersect each other like this. Now, on these two lines, there are vertical angles and there are supplementary angles, which we talked about in a previous video. These angles add up to 180 degrees. Whatever those are, you just know that those two angles add up to 180. Just like you also know that these two angles add up to 180 degrees too, or any of the other combinations of the two angles that are next to each other. So let's draw a set of vertical angles again. Let me erase this here real quick. Alright. Now we know that the angles that are next to each other, or the linear pair, are supplementary, or they add up to 180. But what about these two angles? Those two angles are congruent. So if this is 60, this is also 60 degrees. Those two angles are congruent. Now, of course, because these two angles add up to 180, that makes this one 120 degrees, right? So that you have a total of 180 degrees here. And then, of course, this is 120 degrees. Now, some of you know that if you go all the way around in a circle, it adds up to 360, which, if you do this right and you add up those four numbers, you would get 360 degrees. So angles that are across from each other in a pair of intersecting lines are called vertical angles. And it's very important to know that they are congruent. So let's look at a couple of problems that you might get. Here's a couple of lines. Let's say we put 100 here. X. What does x have to be? Obviously it has to be 100. But what if it's 5x? Now, you may not necessarily be able to do this in your head, but you can write an equation. Since these two angles are congruent, you literally just put an equal sign in between them. Let's write this over to the side, though, so it's a little bit easier to see. 5x equals 100, because you know that they are congruent, as you see right there, the word congruent. So, we have our equation written. Let's divide by 5. X equals 20. Now, does that mean that the angle itself is only 20 degrees? No, it only means that x is 20 degrees, which means that if you were to plug x in here, 5 times x, or 5 times 20, would be 100, which you know that it has to be 100 degrees, because it has to be the same as the one across from it. So we solve for x, we plugged it back in to figure out what the angle would be, 100 degrees, and that is basically a simple version of a vertical angles problem.